everybody out in the world. Last time we were over 30 countries. So wherever you are, welcome. It's good to be back. Day 2 of Day of Security. We're live at the Reddit office. Big hand of applause for Reddit.
Reddit, thank you.
We love you, Reddit. We love you. We love you. We love you. Seriously, it is very difficult to get support during this economic climate change that we've all been in for the last couple of years. And so those sponsors that are here, Reddit and many more, they are, true, real deal people that care about equality of opportunity and to make this all happen for us. So please see the sponsors today. And if you haven't downloaded the Bizbo app, that's where you can get a lot of information about our sponsors. All right. So, Bren, we're going to keep it short, right?
Are going to keep it short. So just for those of you that did not come yesterday, not familiar, my name is Brené Brotman. I am the head of recruiting and chair of the Lookout Foundation. And my partner in crime, maybe not crime is a good use.
It's a weird saying,
Yeah.
and it's true.
My partner, Deidre. As she mentioned, we've been doing this since 2017, and we're so excited to be back in person. So we want to give you a couple of tips about how to make the most of the day. As Deidre mentioned, you want to download the app, and so you could see the agenda. What else should they think about, Deidre, today?
I think getting time meeting people you don't know. We've got a break. We've got food. We've got people to meet if you're in person, and if you're not, you can do it through the Slack channel. So reach out, see what new connections you can make. It is still the truth that finding jobs and career development depends on your network, meaning we have a broken job searching system. We have a broken job matching system. And I just spent the last 10 years of my life on that, and I'm not done. Yeah. Because of that, that means networking and knowing people is critical. So is practicing communication and speaking and delivering solutions and information. And so every time we interact with each other, we're practicing that craft. Every time you get up here on stage, please definitely do get up on stage. You build your confidence. And so that's what we're all about, is networking, sisterhood. And of course, we love the men that support us here. This room is about that.
Absolutely. So our next conference is actually going to be in India. It is our first in-country conference. It's going to be on May 30th, virtual. And then we have another conference happening in November that will be virtual and in person. So we're really excited about that.
Yes, and in India conference, you can join digitally. It just means that we're giving our sisters in India the stage the full time. So join. Yes, yes. We love them. And got great speakers here today, amazing speakers. And so let's kick this off with our first keynote.
So when we're talking about vulnerability here today, I wanted to give some shout outs to all of the prior art that has come before us. Not even 24 hours ago, there have been some amazing talks in this space virtually from our afternoon keynote yesterday from Joy Forsyth was so amazing, talking about her journey. And also towards the end, she did talk about community and how she's leaned on some of her friends and colleagues in the community over the years, and really that helped her grow. And so I have, a hope that you all will see that value and, and join in that movement and be those colleagues for each other. Also, there was a great workshop by Alessandria Palazzi yesterday. The workshop was one of the smaller groups. So if you didn't get a chance to check that out, we'll try to see if we can get those, maybe the slides or something. The workshop yesterday was designed towards leaders. So I think, maybe you might overlook it if you're not in a leader capacity right now. Do not sleep on that workshop. It was so valuable, and it's talking about resilience and about how to fight burnout and about like the things that you need to do in your career to grow and move forward as fast as you can. And I just thought it was really great. And then a shout out to one of Reddit's own, Matt Johansson. He has created a newsletter that you all must check out, which is called Vulnerable You. And he gives love to Brené Brown, but also draws a lot of ties between vulnerability and the security industry, really taking having fun with the overlap of the word vulnerability and human vulnerability, taking it and realizing that those are not different things at all. Actually, this is the space that we do travel in. Really, we are vulnerability engineers, all of us. And so I would encourage you to check out Matt Johansson's Vulnerable You newsletter as well. You can find it wherever your newsletters are sold. And so, yeah, that's there's one more prior art that really influenced how I came to think about this topic. About 2 years ago at our previous company, my colleague Vanya Rohatki, I was so excited to know it was going to be here today. She gave a presentation about Brené Brown's vulnerability book and tied that to shared language with developers. And it was so powerful, and I was so excited that she was going to be here. So I asked her if she could come up here and share a little bit about that talk, and just really quickly share a little bit about her experience last year as well.
Yeah. Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Vanya. I'm a Cal grad and I've been working in the tech industry as a software engineer for the past couple of years. And I have a really powerful quote from Brené Brown's Atlas of the Heart that I really want to share with you all. And it is, language is a portal that transports us to a universe of new choices and second chances. A universe where we can share the stories of our bravest and most heartbreaking moments with each other in a way that builds connection. So, a little bit about my story. I was hired by a big tech company right after my graduation from college. And 7 months into working there full time, I was laid off. And then a couple months after getting laid off from that company, I was rehired by the same company. And when I got laid off, I felt a mix of many different emotions: sad, frustrated, very helpless, and confused as to why a company would have me sign an offer letter a year in advance when I was still in college and then lay me off despite excellent performance reviews by my manager. I ended up writing all of these feelings down and also a list of my contributions to important projects in an internal blog post to share with my colleagues. The blog post ended up going viral, surpassing the CEO's blog post and amassing thousands of views in just a few days. And my current manager actually read that blog post and started asking our recruiting team about how and if they could hire me back. I think there were definitely other factors that ended up with me getting rehired, like redoing the coding interviews. But sharing my experience in a blog post definitely played a huge role. The post allowed employees across the company to feel the level of uncertainty and disappointment that I was feeling, which caused them to root for me and advocate for me. So I think Brené Brown is totally right when she says that language opens up second chances, because it did for me. And with that, I'll pass it back to Marisa.
Thank you so much, Vanya. Yeah, so just a perfect example of what we're trying to talk about here, and a really good example of the superpower of vulnerability and sharing.
So I suppose it might help if we also share some of our stories so that you know where we're coming from. And Vanya, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about yours. I'm so happy that your experience turned out that way. And there are a lot of times that can happen, and there are a whole range of other layoff experiences that can happen as well. So for my own story, I was laid off about 3 months ago from my previous company. But I had actually gone through the layoff process at that company back in late 2022, and I was a survivor. And that comes with all sorts of its own trauma. And Marisa, I know you're going to get into that with your own story, so I won't say too much there. But moving into this year in January, despite all of the rhetoric around everything is fine, we're doing great, everything is great, Suddenly in January, we got rumors that the layoffs would be happening the next day. And so, cue extreme anxiety and a lot of thinking to yourself, have I done good work? Have I done enough work? Am I safe? Am I safe, et cetera? And I am the only person who does the work that I do there, or was, and I did it well. And so I had come to the conclusion by that morning of layoffs that I was 55% sure that I would be okay. And then they cut everybody in Portland, which is where I live. And they cut everybody in the TPM band, which I'm not a TPM, but I fall within that pay structure. And so I was always going to be cut from this. I will say, having been on both sides of layoffs, both people who remained at the company afterwards and now people who were impacted in a different way, I had no idea how unique that would feel, how different being laid off would feel than any other experience I've had in a career. Initially, I was in shock. I actually had a week-long trip planned where we were leaving that night. And I was like, I'm taking this trip. I'm doing it. And I won't go overboard and spend a whole bunch of money, but I also don't want to hold myself back. I want a week where I can just live life like it's normal. And this huge traumatic thing did not just happen to me, because I realized that I process best subconsciously, and giving myself space to do that in another setting would probably be helpful. And I was right. And I'm so grateful I did. And I came back to acute extreme anxiety and depression, because these are often things that people feel coming out of a layoff. At the same time, last year I had done a whole year of career coaching with a dear friend who is very skilled in this area. And I left my last company with the very unique position of having very high confidence in my own value. And that oftentimes that's not the case. Usually people leave a layoff feeling like they did something wrong. There was something wrong with their performance, despite a lot of evidence to the contrary. And yet, I work in a very small subset of our rather small field in a period of mass layoffs. And so having that balance, I think, was really, really interesting. And it made it really difficult to try to figure out how to adjust to this new way of life and figure out how to move forward and all of that. And I did. It took time to recognize that I could adjust to it, to recognize that I had built a safety net and therefore I had runway time, probably beyond severance packages, et cetera, to give myself the gift of looking for a job that would actually enhance my career and not one that would just be a job to take a job to have a job, something that wouldn't set me back in my career or my compensation, that sort of thing, to really trust that I can do this and trust in myself in this unknown process. And Marisa, I know your story was similar but a little different as well. You want to share some of that?
Yeah, and thank you for sharing your story. And I know this is why we came and it's what this is all about, but it's just really meaningful to me to hear other people's stories. And I feel like I'm in such a different place now. So this story that I'm about to tell has a happy ending, I feel. But it was a long road to get there. So if we go back to when my previous company first did layoffs, that was actually in around March 2023, so a year ago. And at that time, I was one of the people that stayed behind, one of the survivors, as Cassie just called it. And I think we can imagine whether you're on either side of that, that it's a traumatic experience, that it's abrupt, it is, very confusing, it is very disruptive, and there's a lot of chaos. But what I wasn't expecting is just how much chaos and, how much survivor's guilt there would be, and just how much that would impact me. Not just because my friends and colleagues were gone overnight, but because of really the confusion and uncertainty around what's next, and would this be the last time that this happens, and a certain suspicion that no, this would not be the last time. And so there was so much anxiety, and I felt anxiety personally and depression. And I took advantage of some of our therapy that was offered to us. But in doing therapy, I felt like I was healing my body, but there was still a disconnect in my mind. And I never felt, I never felt great. And the disruption and anxiety evolved over time, and it became quite difficult for everyone for a long period of time. And fast forward 9 months of this kind of building momentum of a kind of a negative environment, I had thought about what would happen if I was laid off a lot. And I had done my homework and I had thought about it and even like created in my mind a plan. And I thought I was prepared and I had done all the homework I could do. None of that mattered. 9 months later, I was let go in a different exercise, technically not called a layoff. And I was so caught off guard. I was completely sideswiped. And I thought, I remember thinking in that moment, viscerally, this is the last job I will ever have. I am not hireable. I will never have another job again. I cannot believe that my life is over. It was so visceral in that moment. And you just go to a place in your brain of complete shock, and the things that you're thinking are not rational. And I think what we're here today to talk about is how long does that shock period last? How can you make that transformation of starting to turn to working towards recovery? How do you go from shock and your lizard brain thinking you are not okay, you're never going to be okay, to let's start peeling and building and turning to what's next? And so, you know, I realized that what it was going to take is putting myself out there, taking away the isolation that I had self-imposed, and being vulnerable and really getting out there. And so I think, you know, that's what we want to talk a little bit more about, is this word vulnerability that we'll keep saying over and over, and kind of the transformations that we can see with that.
Yeah. And I think we can't get there without talking about some of the trauma that we experience as well, because those tend to go hand in hand. But real quick, I just want to say, not to invalidate anything that you felt. Those are very valid feelings. But if you don't know Marisa, she's been in this industry for like over 15 years. She hired me into my first security role. She is a goddess. So the idea that she's like, I would never work again, is just mind blowing.
Thank you.
She will. We all will. It's fine. But to, I guess, share, kind of build on that with my own experiences of trauma in this, I certainly did have a lot of the things that Marisa has mentioned. But my trauma also presented itself a little bit differently. And so I'm not sure if this resonates with other people, but I grew up poor. And so when I was laid off, my scarcity mindset and all the fears of past lives that I've lived immediately came back. And so I immediately applied for unemployment. I immediately started cutting expenses that I had over decades slowly let myself begin to have. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think that does help me in instances like this. But despite all of the work that I've done on myself in terms of moving as I've become upwardly mobile, which is very unlikely for most people who grow up in poorer situations, and I had a lot of privilege that helped me in that area, something that was almost equally traumatic was realizing that all of that previous trauma was still sitting in my body. Because if it wasn't, I would not have been able to immediately access it, and it wouldn't have taken such control the way that it did. And so again, there are a lot of positives that come out of that, but the idea that some of our former traumas can still regularly influence our everyday lives and then come back full steam when we go through another traumatic event, it feels like trauma building on trauma. I will say that something that really helped me when I was going through this, especially early on in the first month or so, is I was talking with a friend, and she relayed something that her therapist had told her. And that was, the reason that you are struggling so much right now is that you have built a stable and secure life for yourself, and that's really lovely. And so your stress tolerance has gone down. Your ability to tolerate stress has diminished, and that's great. That's a really good sign. And because you have such a solid foundation that you've built for yourself, it's very unlikely that you will ever go back to where you were before. In fact, if anything, that foundation will make it so that you bounce back to either a similar position or even better. And hearing that and recognizing that perspective and being able to have that perspective for myself is what helped me shift my mentality. It's what helped me recognize my own runway time. It's what helped me see this as an opportunity. I may not have been able to come to this conference and be able to speak in front of you with Marisa, for example, and really be able to embrace this idea that, yes, things like layoffs are scary and the unknown, and we don't know what will happen, and they're doable, and I can do that kind of thing. And so being able to have that mentality, I think, really was really impactful for me.
Yeah, I think that's so important to highlight, that you will never go back to where you were before. It maybe feels easy to say, but to kind of internalize that you can never have fewer years of experience than you do now. You will have insights that you didn't have before. And I'm not saying it'll be better in the future, I can't promise that, but you will at least have more knowledge every single time you go through some hardships. And so, yeah, to talk a little bit more about my story, from that perspective, the story of 2023 when my company had layoffs, for me, that story really started in 2020. To the day 3 years earlier, March 2020, the city of San Francisco declared a state of emergency and shut down, and I had just gotten a new job. And I was completely unsure if that would mean that my job would evaporate. Would I even, like, they had to send me an emergency message saying, don't come to the office, your first day is not happening. And so in 2020, it was just a completely chaotic time. And, you know, I wonder if we haven't talked about that enough in this process that we're dealing with, trying to share and rehash our traumas a little bit in order to heal from them. And so I definitely brought all of that trauma and job insecurity and safety insecurity from 2020. I brought that forward with me, kind of unreflected and unhealed. And in 2023, when we did layoffs and a completely abrupt traumatic moment happened once again, I felt wholly unprepared to deal with it. And it was not just about that. It was about everything that came up before that. And, you know, I didn't feel like I was strong going into that situation. And so, yeah, I felt like there's a lot of nuance to it. I felt shame. I felt like I should have been stronger. You know, I wasn't the one laid off. That's the hard thing. Being left behind isn't supposed to be as hard as it was. And so, yeah, um, the thing that I realized, not in 2020 and not in 2023, but only through very recently, through opening myself up and realizing that I needed help and I needed to share with other people. I needed to be vulnerable and to put myself out there. Only through going through that process did I realize that what I lacked in my previous scenarios of just white knuckling through a horrible situation was vulnerability. It was sharing. It was bringing my tribe together, bringing my friends and my colleagues together in a community and leaning on other people. And then realizing this is not something I was going through alone. Other people felt the same way and were in isolation, and they needed to come together too. And so I think to kind of maybe summarize what we're saying here, and is you're not alone. You know, for the folks of you that are going through the similar traumatic experience of being looking for a job right now, having gone through a layoff that was abrupt and sudden, unplanned, you're not alone. And there's a community of people here in this room, but just in general, you know, this is a time where people are open to that experience and you don't need to go through it alone. So yeah, I think that sharing has its own reward. But if that altruistic reason for sharing doesn't bite you, then I think the other reason that we are making a case for here for why vulnerability should be a part of your process is because it makes you faster. I can show you how much faster I recovered from what felt like the end of my career life experience. I can show you how much faster I rebounded it just for the simple task of making it known to other people and sharing in a community. And so that's, the takeaways here that we're trying to leave you with is this isn't theoretical. This is, our unconventional keynote here. This is what we have been doing with each other, Cassie and I, and it has made it's been a superpower. It has just helped me rebound so much faster. And I sit here today feeling optimistic, positive, hopeful, and with a much better plan than I had before 6 months ago.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true. And that's not to say that there are not times when we still feel anxious and scared and disappointed and all the myriad of emotions, but we finally have space for the more positive ones as well. And I think to your point, a lot of that has to do with being willing to let people see you in that state. And being vulnerable is not easy. Like, we're not trying to say that this is an easy thing to do by any means whatsoever, especially in a male-dominated industry like ours, where things like vulnerability and empathy are often looked down on. Like, we're just being emotional, how dare we? And so I'm curious if you have thoughts about what it's like, or maybe even tips around like the power of vulnerability as women in an industry where maybe that is less desired.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much nuance here. It is really tricky, and I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't be strategic and do what you think is best in your career. I'm not trying to say that you should change how you have been, navigating in your professional work environment. I personally, I feel that upbringing telling me to be small and to obey leadership, I feel that there's a lot of repercussions for pushing back and to have negative emotions being known in your professional environment. So, we don't give this advice lightly. I understand that there's a lot of nuance to it. And I feel in my own experiences like wanting to keep my emotions, especially negative emotions, secret. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think there's some positive there too, right? Like, for example, I have had a lot of people share secrets with me, and it's because they know I won't share those secrets. And a lot of them are from perhaps women or non-binary people who maybe don't have other people to confide in. And so that is a huge honor to me. And sometimes they're secrets that maybe I shouldn't have. And so, like, what's the balance there? Like, how do you know what is appropriate, what's not appropriate? Obviously, maybe it's more situation specific, but I think it can get tricky.
Yeah, like the negative that can come with being somebody that is seen as an open book, or somebody that you can share your emotions with. Where is the line where that becomes dumping your emotions on somebody that has maybe doesn't have the boundaries that they should, to kind of say no to that? And I think it's really important to find a safe, that like trusted peers to share with, and to find a safe way to do this.
Yeah. And I would say, not to put you on the spot, but I think this keynote literally is about putting ourselves on the spot. I know before, you and I have talked about how, you've had an instance before where somebody came and just not only dumped on you, but dumped a lot of anger on you. And like, how do you sit with something like that?
Yeah, I find that when I'm sharing, I am a little bit more friendly to myself. When I share things out loud, I find that I put sort of an optimistic spin on those things, but that's not always the case, with everybody. And this is kind of, a lot of this is raw. And so this is maybe the time where we're talking about, um, being protective of yourself whilst you're doing your, being vulnerable. I think that it's not necessarily the same thing to dump emotion onto somebody, and especially in these complicated times where there's so much disruption and so much trauma that's going around us. There is a difference between being vulnerable and being disrespectful, being somebody that is not respecting the two-way partnership of that. So just we wanted to show all sides of this, and we wanted to talk about the hard parts. This is not easy what we're talking about doing, and so having the foresight and having boundaries and really going into things knowing when something doesn't feel right, and this doesn't feel like it serves you, and it doesn't feel healthy, and this doesn't feel like growth, that can happen too. And know that now, and don't think that this is what we meant by that. Don't stand for that, and really, explore boundaries. What do you think about how to set up boundaries in your transformation journey?
Yeah, I think that is a big part of being vulnerable, is learning how to and when to have those boundaries, and then still be able to have empathy for people in those situations. And that's a really hard balance. I think it takes practice. And that is what I've really relied on my community for. So I might reach out to somebody if I'm preparing to, let's say, I'm saying this very technically, but like preparing to set a boundary. So I might reach out to my friends and be like, hey, I was planning on saying this. Is this appropriate? Am I overreacting? Spoiler, I'm almost never overreacting. We are almost always underreacting. And that's what the community is for, because they can go, no, girl, more, please. That sort of thing, right? It's really important to have that community lens to it and be able to really rely on the community members in our, either loved ones, but also maybe people in our circles and our networks, anybody who might be able to reflect back at you things maybe you're less capable of seeing and help you set those boundaries and then hold those boundaries. I think that's really important.
I'm a big fan of community.
Really shocking given the work we're in.
I've had time in my life as a community manager. I've just gotten a lot of value out of the community. And I guarantee I would not be sitting here today without the community that I have made. Yeah. So the community that we have here, I think is fantastic. Wanted to once again give a shout out to the Slack channel for the Day of Security Slack.
Please use it.
You all have built a big community there, and it's exactly what we're talking about. There's a couple of other Slack channels that I'm on that have like a similar vibe, but this is a really good one. And so if you're maybe early in your career, or if you're just starting to brush off your COVID times and you want to get back into community, as I've heard a lot of people say this past year, I want to get back into it. Dust that off and get back out here. Come to the meetups or the virtual ones, meet people, but also try to recognize when other folks are doing that and meet them halfway. When they put up their hand and say, I kind of want to talk to somebody about this topic, meet them halfway and be a receptive audience for that. And so everybody will benefit from doing that together. And so in my process this year, specifically, a specific tip is having an accountability buddy. So maybe after this talk or at the lunchroom today, you could start some conversations with your fellow attendees, and I'll give you a talk prompt, so maybe that's helpful. You can say, hey, did you hear the keynote this morning? What did you think about that?
It was good. It was great.
Insightful.
It was wonderful.
And what did you think about that idea of an accountability buddy? Do you have an accountability buddy? I don't either. Oh my goodness. This is really a coincidence. We should be accountability buddies together, because I am trying to study for this, or I'm looking for a job, and I would love just to bounce some ideas off of another person. And even if that's not you, you can still be a great sounding board for somebody else. It doesn't take a lot of time. And once you start off those kinds of friendships, you will be surprised how many years of friendship you can get, because we just never know who's going to be working with who in a year or 5 years and where people will land. Some of the friendships that I've made in the early days when I was the one asking for help, now down the road, I'm in a position where I can give help, and it just is, it's the fabric of community, but it doesn't happen by accident. You need to meet people halfway and really be, be a contributor to the community as well.
Yeah, and I would even share, or maybe add on to that, to say, even let's say you are not even early in your career, but maybe you're looking to transform into something else in your career, transition to a new area, and you feel like you're a novice, there are things that people are learning from you as well. So I think that is also really valuable. And I know that I would not be where I'm at in this process of the layoffs. I would not be nearly as comfortable with the process as I am, which is not to say it is super comfortable, without my community. And sometimes we don't talk about things like jobs or opportunities or networks. We just talk. But having somebody who's in your court, having people who can boost you up, who can encourage you, any of those things, that validation may not seem as effective or as important as it is, but it is so important. And so I am so grateful for that. And I think all of these things we're saying is true regardless of whether or not you've experienced layoffs, you will ever experience layoffs. If you're going to ever go through a career change, for example, chances are you will want to rely on your community. So I think as we start to wrap up this keynote, did want to share maybe a couple of takeaways. So Marisa, if you have some thoughts about some of your top takeaways.
Yeah, what we were so excited to share with you all, this journey that Cassie and I have been going on, helping each other, being there for each other in a really traumatic and difficult time. It has made all the difference, and you can do that too. There's nothing. I think the whole point is there's nothing unique about what we have shared. We were friends before, but I don't think it would have been any less meaningful if we had, started talking more recently. And so that's what, to summarize, what we wanted to share is that there's a superpower in vulnerability, and it is a strength, and it is how you build resilience. And each time you experience a difficulty in the future, that's how you get better. It's through kind of doing the work, which is something it took me a long time to realize, to be honest, but so it goes. And also to realize that you're not alone. If you're experiencing these particular issues, especially in this time, it is very common. You would be surprised. And times are tough out there for the folks that are job hunting. So I think you'll find a very receptive audience. So I would encourage you to put yourself out there and to kind of fight isolation. Isolation is a huge problem in our community, in the security industry specifically. Joy talked a little bit about it yesterday. There were some other great talks yesterday that have talked about kind of the burnout and the isolation that can come from that is a huge problem, and it's something I'm really concerned about for my fellow practitioners. And so, be mindful or recognize that the isolation is real as well. And then this is, there's a lot of altruistic benefits that you can get out of this, but also just some really tangible ones. These tips that we're trying to give are going to make you faster and bounce back faster, and that's called resiliency. And this is how you do it. I wonder if we could do maybe a poll of the audience, because I'm wondering how many people does this resonate to? How many folks in the room have been feeling like there is a trauma or a difficult time that they have experienced in the past year? And
Ooh, we're looking at a majority.
that's a lot of people. Yeah. And this is the group that you might find your a buddy, somebody that wants to just you know, define it however you want, but to do the work with together, it doesn't have to be official, you know, it can be fun and organic, but you have to move forward. You have to do something. And if you do the work, you will not be in the place that you were before. You will never be back to that first person that experienced that trauma all those years ago. You'll move forward, I promise, and you'll keep going.
Yeah, I love all that.
And I know that you have some things that you would like to share as well. We did promise some tips and tricks.
Yeah. So I mentioned before, I think at the beginning, that I worked with a career coach last year. And I don't want to say too much out of respect for her and the fact that this is her business. If you are interested in career coaching, her name is Gracie Miller, Live Life Purpose. She's fantastic. But I did want to share some things because regardless of whether or not you are currently job hunting, you may be future job hunting, you may be thinking about transitioning a career, any of that. I found this so impactful just for my entire life. And so I thought maybe this could also be an opportunity to share some of this. I'm going to, right after this talk, post a PDF of sort of a guide of working through some of what I'm about to mention in the Slack channel under I think it's the conference speaker resources or conference room resources channel. But a big part of the first few sessions that I worked through with her was around self-discovery. And it was amazing. I mean, I love self-discovery, but trust me, this stuff is really cool. So she had me think through things like, what are my values? What's my mission, my purpose? What do I like to do? What are things that I have done? What is my skill set? What am I passionate about? What are my deal breakers? What are things I don't want to do again? And taking the time to really sit with some of this was really helpful. But the 3 questions that I sat with in the beginning, but I think I would recommend sitting with over and over again as things start to evolve for you, is what do I want to do more of in my work and my life? What do I want to do less of in my work and my life? And what do I think is holding me back from getting there, from the more? And sitting with those and sort of thinking through those has been really, really helpful for me. I mean, that's how I came to the vision of what I want to do in the industry and things like that. And so highly recommend going through some of that work for yourself. You can do that with the community, with any of the people you meet here, et cetera. But thinking through some of those things, I think, could be just a really fun exercise as well. With that, I think we've shared all the things in our heads that are relevant, hopefully, to you, but would love to hear from any of you. Do you have questions, thoughts, concerns, feelings? Amazing. I saw this hand first, and then right here. And there's a mic. Thank you, Ginger.
Okay, now it's green. Hi, I'm Chrissy. I'm a recruiter at Epic. Thank you very much for sharing your stories. I was curious, how has your experience that you shared impacted how you're looking for jobs or what you're looking for in a company as you're job searching?
I personally had a lot of ideas in the beginning about how things would go. It's hard out there. I found that I really needed to refine what I was looking for. And, you know, to be honest, I started by saying, I am never going to work for a company again that would do layoffs. And that was just not realistic. It's just not realistic. And so I've found that working on myself, I think, is just as an important part. And so I will be a more resilient, open-eyed person going into any situation versus trying to tailor fit, you know, and find the perfect company. You know, to be honest, just to share with you all, I'm sending out resumes every day, and it's been 6 months, and that's, you know, I don't believe it's because I'm being too specific. It's hard out there. But I do think it's appropriate to ask in your interviews, you know, what is, like, if you're specifically talking to your hiring manager in the interview, maybe specifically, like, what is your take on burnout? How do you try to build up your employees? That sort of thing. And I think you can learn a lot from how prepared they are to answer a question like that. What do you think?
Yeah. I will say it's allowed me to have more time to connect with people in my network. And so I've put a lot of focus into that. I was just saying this week actually to somebody, I don't know how I was ever employed, and because I'm so busy right now that I don't even have a job. But that's because so much of this is getting to chat with people and have one-on-ones and have these great conversations with my community. And I've had some interviews and such. And I think being able to reflect back and do some of that work around the trauma I felt and move through this period of anxiety and depression into this new space, I haven't taken jobs that I feel like are not a great fit. So in full transparency, I actually turned down a job, even though I don't have a backup. And it was a very hard decision. I don't want to downplay that, but I realized that I would be very much settling for that role, which is not to say that the position wasn't good for somebody. And the message that I would have been sending myself is that I don't believe in myself. I don't believe I can do this. And I wasn't okay with that. I will say also, as an amusing anecdote, I have been open to talking with people about a whole bunch of different types of roles because you never know, and you never know where those connections might lead. And last week, I had a call with somebody who wanted to talk about something that might be complementary to my skill set. And it turned out that she was trying to recruit me into her MLM organization. So it doesn't always work out, but it does leave you with some very amusing stories. But that's my approach.
Marisa and Casey, thank you so much for such a thoughtful, impactful, and authentic, unconventional keynote. I am extremely touched listening to your experiences. Now, some of our sisters, they also experience layoffs or, sudden departure, and that has created trauma. And anybody who suffers from trauma, they get into this loop of soul searching because they want to find answers. So what would you like to share with them, how to quickly get out of the loop? Because it is quite possible they may not ever get a closure or find out the real reasons.
So I have a few things. I will say I am lucky to have a therapist, and being able to work with her has been really helpful. Marisa, I know you mentioned doing therapy before in that period between the 2 layoffs at your previous company. But I think there also is something to recognizing that soul searching is important. So getting stuck in anxiety loops and not reaching out to people and panicking, it's a part of the process. We don't want to get stuck there. But doing things like that self-discovery work or identifying new opportunities requires some of that soul searching. And so something that my therapist had really helped me with, not just in this instance, but with other things, is when I was in an acute anxiety phase a couple of months ago, in particular, I had a call with her and I was like, I don't know how people do this every day. I can't do this. I need tips. I need like some sort of strategy to get me through it. And she went, what if you just accepted it? And I was like, okay. But she was right. So there's the balance that we have to find between I have to feel the feelings I'm feeling because I'm validating those feelings. They're there because they're giving me information. And I can't let myself get stuck in those feelings. And that's, I think, where that community comes into play. That's where some of our own soul searching comes into play. That's where writing out things at least has been helpful for myself, and I know a few other people. And so I think just playing around with strategies and trying a whole bunch of different ones, but recognizing some days are just not going to be great days, but that's okay because they're not forever. I think those are the tips that I would say.
Yeah, awesome. I think that's it for us. We've been so happy to share with you all.
Thank
It's
you
meaningful
so
to us.
much.
It's hopefully helpful to you. Thank you.